never has to file a special use permit. But if the rezoning goes forward and it doesn't get approved, then he still has the option with very little, I guess, time in between, because he doesn't have to go through this process again, to file the special use permit. So I guess I'm confused by that.
So in response, the ordinance, he can proceed with the rezone application. We can proceed with that as it's submitted. It's still on file. As of now, it's scheduled to be heard by the Planning Commission on the 27th. If that goes forward, the Commission will make a recommendation to the governing body, and then it goes to you to be decided. He can do that. If he does that and then it's denied, then you still, in order for him to submit a special use permit application, you still have to grant him permission. You have to waive the limitation on successive applications. The letter that was submitted by Mr. Jones that I received, I can't remember what date I received it, but within the last couple of weeks, it's not clear in saying that, but just to clarify, I contacted Mr. Jones and asked him if he wanted to be on this meeting agenda. If the City Council decides to grant him permission, he can still decide not to withdraw and continue with the rezone. But he would, the way this is proposed to you tonight, he would have to come back and request that waiver after the rezone process. Keeping in mind that they have asked to, one of the concerns raised by the applicant at the Planning Commission meeting was they would have to pay another application fee. In my opinion, if he was to withdraw, if he was to proceed and then submit another application, with all the time that's required, the expense of publishing the notice, it would not be appropriate to waive that fee on a subsequent application. I think if he withdraws tomorrow and reapplies, it's appropriate because we did not let the whole thing run its course.
Okay, so let me just summarize just to make sure I understand. If we approve this tonight, if we approve this piece of it, the permission, he can move forward with the rezoning, and if the rezoning comes before council and it's approved, let's say, then that's fine. If the rezoning comes before council and it's not approved, then he can turn around, he already has his permission, and he can file the special use permit. Is that correct?
We're not recommending that it be done that way.
But can it?
I think that's probably a question for legal counsel. I think it would be unusual to grant him permission at this point before the rezone has run its course. It seems the appropriate thing to do. If you, in my opinion, if the council wants the rezone to run its course and not recommend that the rezone be withdrawn and then another application be submitted, then the council should not grant permission tonight. Let the rezone run its course, and then once that happens, if it's denied and the applicant wants to come back and ask for permission again, they could do that.
And is there any downside to that?
It draws this out longer than it needs to be drawn out, in my opinion. Right now, if we're talking about a rezone application, it'll be heard next Tuesday night by the Commission. They'll make a recommendation within about 3 to 4 weeks. It'll be heard by the City Council, and it'll be decided. So it'll be decided in September. If the rezone is withdrawn, and if we can get it on the agenda soon enough and hold and consider the special use permit at the September meeting, then after a recommendation by the Planning Commission on the special use permit application, then in October the council could make a decision. If you let the rezone run its course, and if the applicant doesn't like the outcome of the rezone application, which is, let's assume it can be decided in September, and then they have to come back for permission, then you're drawing this out another two months.
I agree with Christy. Then why can't we give permission? Why can't it be at the same time?
so we don't draw it out.
What's the legal ramifications of that?
Legally, all you're being asked to do tonight is grant a waiver, not
Right.
to
Right.
approve an application.
Correct.
So even though there may be a preferred way of doing it, legally, he has the right to request the waiver. You can grant the waiver, and he can decide which way
Whether or not
he's
to
going
file
on
or
his
not.
own.
Exactly.
Well, because that could shorten, it might not be drawn out as much
Right.
as if we have it at the same time, right?
I also got something else from, and let me ask for clarification again, Mike. You said that if he withdrew his rezone and decided to go with a special use permit application, that because of the fact that we didn't let this run its course through rezone, he would not be subject to having to pay those refile fees, correct? You would look to waive.
That's what I'm saying.
And so that would be the carrot to him pulling his rezone app. You would then waive his fees for applying for a special use permit a second time. If he decides to go forward with a rezone and then doesn't like the rezone result and tries to apply then, he would have to pay those fees again. Is that correct?
That's what I'm suggesting, yes.
How
Yes.
can we decide that? I mean, is it just on your recommendation, or is it our recommendation, or?
Well, it would be up to Mr. Jones's decision at that point,
No,
wouldn't
I
it?
mean, if the fees are charged.
No,
How much are the fees are we talking about? Are we talking about thousands of dollars, a couple hundred, what is it?
The rezone application fee was $900.
Which has already been paid.
It's been paid. Special use permit, I'd have to look at the ordinance. I believe it's in the neighborhood of $400, $600, $700.
so you're thinking something short of $1,500 total.
We're already
$900
Yeah.
has already been paid.
Yeah.
So there's no
Roughly.
refund for the 900 if he withdraws the 900 spent, is that right? I mean,
Yes.
okay.
That's what-
beyond what the council can decide. I mean, that's policy.
To be very specific about the fees, the governing body adopts a fee ordinance.
Right.
And it sets the fees. One way to interpret that is that the community development director has no discretion at all, and would tell the applicant that, no, you're withdrawing the application, you're submitting another one, you have to pay the fees. So I'm suggesting to you tonight that it would be reasonable if they withdrew the application, since they didn't expend the full effort of the city on a rezone application, to accept the special use permit application without charging a fee.
Okay.
But if they're allowed to run their course and then submit another application after all of that, it seems like it's
You're putting.
contrary to the intent of the resolution, the fee resolution that you adopted.
Sure.
But let me ask a question. I mean, in all, we've talked about this from a fee perspective, and that we like to we want our fees to recoup the cost of staff as much as we can. So if the rezoning is actually going to be held next week, I would assume that most of the work is already done. And so if you turn around and do a special use permit, which is going to be based on very much the same information, I mean, how much work are we really talking about from a staff perspective?
Well, the work, there's some additional staff work, certainly. There's the administrative work of publishing a notice and filing and processing the application. So it's not like starting fresh with nothing. And again, I think the city council has the discretion to tell me how they want me to handle the application fees.
Well, let's get the brass tacks here. When we're talking about the rezone app, I think there's a concern, and I had this concern when I saw this item on the agenda. It almost seems like the Planning Commission wants to punt on this one. They don't want to make a decision on a rezone. I think that's why they would like to see the rezone application be withdrawn.
I don't think, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I mean,
There's no application before you tonight, and you should not comment on what the planning commission may
Okay.
or may not do, what you may or may not. You just have a request for a waiver.
For a waiver,
before you-
yeah.
okay.
Stick with that.
All right, I was just going
Thank you,
based
Jim.
on previous, I was going based on previous comments at published meetings of the Planning Commission. And that's open record, so that's what